Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the FASTFORWARD Innovations Limited investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we'll notify you when they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded, and before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Ed McDermott, CEO, and Lance de Jersey, CFO of FASTFORWARD Innovations Limited. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate that a lot. And thank you very much to Investor Meet Company. Really brilliant platform. I've only used it once before with another company that I'm involved with, but very impressive. And I'm sure everyone would like to give some feedback, and I'm sure Paul and the team would appreciate that as well. But thank you very much for hosting us, and thank you very much, investors, potential investors, and everyone who has taken time out of their busy day to listen to us present. There's a number of things that we're obviously going to cover. We're not going to be able to cover every sort of detail of the company. We have quite a lot of, in some cases, complex investments. And of course, we don't really want to get bogged down in the minutiae today. So really what we're going to do is give you an overview of the company, where we're at, and then talk about some of the key themes and things that we expect to see going forward. And obviously, as Paul has suggested, there'll be some Q&A at the end. So I'm going to dive in and just very quickly give you a little bit of history on FASTFORWARD. FASTFORWARD is a sort of legacy company. So although I am now CEO, I was not necessarily in charge the whole time. And therefore, some of these investments, which thankfully are all largely pretty good, and in some cases exceptionally good, are assets that were acquired before my time. So it's really been a case of myself and the board have, this changing of the guard has brought us to a position now where we are trying to move all of these investments forward at as fast a pace as possible. But really, as you've seen, we're really trying to embrace the cannabis theme more than ever. We were the first ever AIM company to invest in the space as an investment company. And we remain the only AIM-listed company that's invested in cannabis directly. That we also, with our returns that we have so far generated from cannabis, we're also the most successful for that very reason. As a sort of general overview, FASTFORWARD is an AIM-listed, closed-ended investment fund. We're regulated by the Guernsey Financial Services Commission. And ultimately, what we are trying to achieve is get a balance of investments with some early stage, some sort of moving towards liquidity events, and some that have already passed through into liquidity events. We've got a very good track record, as I said, in the cannabis space and cannabinoid wellness and life sciences sector. And right now, we have 11 investments with a balance of liquid, pre-liquidity, and some longer-term investments as well. As you will have noted, the recent FCA guidelines enables us to increase our focus on the cannabis world and cannabinoid sector. And of course, we also still look at sort of health and wellness that may not necessarily have a cannabis theme, but it's certainly something that we're very interested in doing. Our team, we believe, has all of the attributes to drive forward pretty much any business in any sector, but ultimately what FASTFORWARD has been guilty of in the past is not being incredibly focused, and that is what we've tried to address, and we think we've got an excellent team to take things forward, encompassing all of those attributes that are required. And obviously we're going to cover the board in a little bit more detail going forward. Let me move to the next slide. In terms of key data, you'll notice some of the names on our shareholder registry there. Lorne Abney, our former chairman and CEO, Jim Mellon, also one of the founders of FASTFORWARD. Both have amassed exceptional fortunes. We're still very lucky to have their support as shareholders. They're also very much involved in a lot of the portfolio assets directly. So again, it's a nice relationship to have with our large shareholders. Peter Saladino, a notable figure in the cannabinoid and cannabis space. Norbert Teffelberger, a very big name in the gaming space. And more recently, Richard Hackett, who's a private investor who's built up a meaningful position on his own and is also being a very welcome and supportive shareholder. In terms of market cap, we've sort of moved between the sort of 25 and 30, just over 30 million pound market cap of late. You know, we don't necessarily feel that that's a fair reflection of the assets that we have. And I think obviously over the coming weeks and months, we're going to be able to prove that. In terms of shares in issue, at the moment, we have just over 215 million shares, which for an AIM company that's been around for quite a while is not too bad. It suggests that we haven't been doing multiple placings, and it's not really our modus operandi. We really want to be able to organically grow as much as possible and keep that share count as low as possible. So going on to the board, I've had over 15 years experience in building small, medium-sized companies. High growth is my skill set, and ultimately I've been very fortunate to work across a number of different industries, but really it boils down to my skill set is putting capital to work and helping to build the assets and support those assets as they move through various different phases to becoming much bigger opportunities and ultimately looking to exit those opportunities. I'm going to hand over to Lance here so that he may introduce himself, and Lance, if you may cover the rest of the board, I would appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Happy to do so. So Lance the Jersey, I'm finance director for FASTFORWARD, and by way of background, I started out many years ago in franchising, initially accounting and business transfers, a bit of business turnaround type work, and you know, supporting that. I'm a qualified as an accounting technician and as a chartered secretary. Back in 2000, I moved to New Zealand and lived quite differently for a while, running small businesses of my own, before going back into business sales as a business broker, working out of Auckland for nearly 5 years. Returned back to Guernsey, where I was born in 2010, and at that point came into the private equity space as a company secretary for a large Swiss private equity company. That soon developed into a board seat and ended up heading the office here in Guernsey for 4 years. So a mixed background, most recently in the private equity and venture capital, as with FASTFORWARD. Moving on and looking at Ian Burns, our longest serving director. He's been with FASTFORWARD since 2015. He previously had a long career in finance, including stints as managing director of a large fiduciary company in Guernsey, and also setting up his own company, Via Exec, which is a management consulting business. He's the former finance director of FASTFORWARD. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. He keeps an eye on me, I can say that. And he's now our non-executive chairman, for which we're very grateful to Ian. Luke Cairns is our newest director. He joined us just over a year ago, having moved back to Guernsey following a career in the London markets. His background there was as head of corporate finance for an AIM nomad and broker, and he brings with him a strong deal experience background, and also that experience of the regulators side of the fence, which frankly is invaluable for us, especially as we're now working more and more in this developing regulatory setting that surrounds the cannabis investments. So really good to have Luke on board. I'll hand back to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Lance. Appreciate that. Yeah, really pleased to have a really solid board around me. Having such financial expertise is essential when looking into companies, whatever stage they're at. As you can imagine, and worth stating, we see hundreds of opportunities. Very often in a week, we'll see well over 100 opportunities come through our inbox. Often people we know, often people that have effectively cold and getting in touch. So our deal flow is excellent. We obviously have a very good network of extremely wealthy people, lots of funds, family offices that are, there's a very good sort of cooperative that goes on, and we see a hell of a lot of deal flow. Now, it's important to note that what we're looking for are the real 1%ers. 99% of what we see ultimately ends up in the bin. That's not necessarily because they're bad companies, although believe me, we do see a lot of absolutely terrible opportunities. Ultimately, we are looking for that 1%, and it's got to be areas that we can actually add value to. It's a mistake that has potentially been made historically by FastForward, investing in areas that there's been little understanding and little ability to really influence those opportunities. So really, we undertake really rigorous due diligence on these companies, really get to know the management. This is particularly in the case of early stage investments. And ultimately, because we have the knowledge and we've actually built companies and been involved in the building process companies, we can actually ask all the right questions and do our utmost to de-risk even the riskiest of investments in the riskiest of sectors. But ultimately, bringing these companies through the life cycle, through to an exit as quickly but as sensibly as possible, to get the best returns is what we're all about, and being able to not just financially support assets that we invest in, but also utilize our skill set to help develop those companies is really important to us. And again, we ultimately want to be the investment destination for people who are seeking a liquid investment into opportunities that may not be liquid at the time. So it's one way of getting liquidity on in a liquid investment by investing in FastForward. Ultimately, it's worth considering, how do people really access these early stage deals, and we've really tried to become a vehicle for that. And even more recently, you've seen some of these quite hot IPOs, where even with our sort of network and firepower of cash, we've still only been able to get very small allocations. So at times it can be a very competitive situation, but we believe with our knowledge, skill set, we're going to be able to deliver in times where the market isn't quite so liquid and excitable as it is right now. Going into the portfolio overview, I'm going to cover these individual assets in more detail later on, but just to give you an idea of the verticals, the industries that we are in currently, and obviously I'll try and give you a steer on where we're heading in the future. As you can see right now, medical cannabis and cannabinoid wellness dominates our investments. We have 6 current investments in either CBD, hemp, lifestyle type companies, and also investments in pharmaceutical cannabis companies, i.e. companies that are dealing with the psychoactive ingredients in cannabis. So we have EMAC Life Sciences, Yuma, which is Asia's leading CBD lifestyle company, Southwest Brands, which is effectively, we believe, the Hut Group of the CBD space, Little Green Pharma, an Australian listed and Australian domicile company, but also starting to move into Europe, Cannabo, an Israeli cannabis tech company, and a very small piece of cellular goods. In the life sciences and biotech sector, which is something we still really like, we have Juvenescence, which is Jim Mellon's longevity play, and Portage, which is a biotech company now listed on NASDAQ. In the technology and fintech vertical there, you'll actually see that we're not, that's going to be a theme that's not going to be quite so prominent going forward. Ultimately, although Leap Gaming is our largest asset by both percentage and current value on the NAV, ultimately these are areas that we won't be looking to invest heavily in the future. We also have Vimo Education and of course Factum. So now diving into with a bit more detail on these companies, and again, I apologize that I'm not able to get granular about this, but it's really just to provide a overview of where we're at and what these companies are doing at a high level. Portage Biotech, we came to this investment through a direct investment we had in Intensity Therapeutics, which is an intratumoral injection technology, really making great waves. But again, it was an illiquid asset for us. We had the opportunity to sell our position directly to Portage, who already owned a large percentage of Intensity, and it turned out to be a fantastic trade. We got our shares at around $10, and it's traded up to as high as 40 recently. And of course, it's now moved on to the NASDAQ exchange, which is really the big home of biotech. And we expect to see a number of big moves by Portage in the coming weeks and months. Yuma Wellness. Yuma was actually a legacy asset that we managed to utilize our skill set in the cannabinoid sector to really harness what had some really brilliant attributes, but was ultimately a flailing company. Yuma has done big things since we pivoted it to becoming Asia's first hemp and CBD lifestyle. And you would have noticed yesterday that Yuma acquired Emax Wellness brands, which also means that by virtue of this, they're moving into Europe and other territories. But really predominantly the biggest markets for Yuma right now are China, Japan, and Taiwan. But they also have a good link into Australia when that becomes a easier market to sell over-the-counter CBD products. So yeah, very excited about Yuma, also listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. But I also think you're going to see a London listing for Yuma fairly shortly. I'm pretty certain that the management of Yuma will want to get a home in London as well. Little Green Pharma, one of our recent investments, we invested $560,000 in their recent placing at 65 cents. Really brilliant little vertically integrated medicinal cannabis company. Again, vertically integrated companies are, in my opinion, one of the best ways to get into an early stage market such as cannabis. Owning your supply chain is crucial. It allows you to control all your costs and ultimately pass those cost savings on. And even in a market where the price of medical cannabis to patient has come down significantly over the last 2 years, they're in a position where they can be extremely profitable. Most notably, they recently were awarded one of the slots in the French pilot. So, really starting to have a bit more of an international presence, and I think they're going to be one to watch. And also another company that may well come to London at some point. Cannabo Group, one of the first London Standard listed companies, Israeli cannabis tech. We had a very small position in Cannabo. It went extremely well, and we really like the guys, and we hope to see them continue to do good things. Moving on to cellular goods, the big David Beckham associated float recently. Again, we got a really tiny allocation in this one, which was very, very disappointing. We weren't particularly happy with how that placing was handled, and it obviously went very well over the first couple of days of trading. And look, in the long run, having a big brand like Beckham is a very smart move. Personally, I would probably like to see him own more of the company, and thereby not necessarily be getting paid. I have no idea what their deal with Mr. Beckham is, but hopefully he is promoting goods on the basis that it will add value to his own holding. Moving on to Emac Life Sciences, of which I'm a founder. Emac is now is Europe's largest independent medical cannabis company. So we built Emac from a very small base, utilizing people who had a lot of experience in the sector. And now we're looking at about nearly 200 employees and 8 different territories. It's a really exciting business to be part of. Certainly, I myself have learned a huge amount about building companies at scale quickly. And we look forward to very, very big things for Emac in the future. Certainly, it's our aim to sort of emulate this kind of thing going forward and make sure that we have even earlier stage exposure to such assets. Moving on to Juvenescence. As I previously mentioned, this is Jim Mellon's brainchild, all focused on longevity. So helping us live longer, but not only live longer, live better for longer, which I think is a very, very interesting space to be in. I think it's going to be one of the key industries going forward. And we've got to expect very big things from Juvenescence this year. We also expect to see them come to a liquidity event, and that will likely be on NASDAQ. But again, we think a huge amount of value for us yet to capture in Juvenescence, and hopefully the liquidity to decide one way or the other. Leap Gaming, as I previously mentioned, our largest asset by both percentage and currently on the NAV at by value as well. That's not to say other assets won't, that NAV is a fair reflection of the value, or indeed that our other assets aren't building very, very quickly as well. But Leap is a really interesting business. I recently joined the board to help Leap move towards a liquidity event. And, you know, at the same time as moving forward and building the business, building out new customers alongside their household name brands such as NASCAR, EuroLeague, and of course IMG and the ATP Tennis Tour. IMG, I should add, are also significant shareholders of Leap and are partnered with them to do a number of different things. They also do a lot of casino-based games, so they supply a lot of the online gaming platforms with casino games, which is a really nice source of revenue. And you know, helped quite somewhat by the pandemic, but also virtual sports has been going, you know, running really, really well, and we expect to see big things from Leap going forward. Moving on to Southwest Brands. Southwest Brands, as I mentioned earlier, we believe this has the potential to be the Hut Group of the CBD industry. These guys are a really impressive management team. They know how to build brands. They've done it before. Indeed, some of the shareholders are really quite impressive people in Southwest Brands as well. And I expect to see some heavy news flow coming out of Southwest Brands over the coming weeks and months. Moving on to Vimo Education. Vimo is actually a fairly small asset in terms of our NAV, but not one to be written off. It's got a hell of a lot of things going on. I wish we could share the numbers with you on Vimo, because it's really quite an impressive business at this stage, and solving a really important problem, which is the student debt crisis in the US. I expect you know, Vimo will not necessarily be a fast mover in terms of reaching a liquidity event or some form of M&A, but it's one that I think could very well pop up at some point and surprise us all. Moving on to Factum. Factum we currently hold on our NAV as a 0. Unfortunately, where it comes to the blockchain as a software businesses, they just haven't been able to monetize themselves anywhere near as quickly as they felt that they would. We've telegraphed to the market our feelings around Factum a few times, but ultimately, you know, we do hope to get something back for our investment there. But you know, we for very sensible reasons, we've kept it as a 0 on the balance sheet. But that is not to say that we will not get something for our efforts in Factum at some stage. So moving on to potential investments, ultimately, we don't just invest in new projects. We also do follow-on investments with our existing portfolio. It's very important that we support the companies that we believe are going to do the best. And ultimately, there's no harm in following these companies, particularly if we think they're going to reach significantly higher valuations than where they are. And again, it's all about supporting the growth and the trajectory of the growth of some of these businesses. When you have these hyper growth sectors, particularly in the cannabis space, you really need to support that as much as possible, because it, you know, consolidating upon a solid foundation is very important when it takes some when newer companies coming into the space are going to have a much harder road ahead of them. Scale is super important. You see that in the case of EMAC. Little Green Farm is already starting to develop at a bit of scale as well, and that's really exciting for us and for shareholders of FastForward. In terms of early stage opportunities, my goal and something that hasn't happened as much as it probably should have historically is making sure that FastForward gets into these opportunities at the founder level. That's where we really need to be. We've been very good at delivering sort of PE type returns, but ultimately I'm looking to get us to a position where we deliver VC type returns. That means you're sort of 10x plus. I want to see 4-digit returns on cash. In terms of growth drivers, there is a massive demand for cannabinoid wellness and of course medical cannabis and also pharmaceutical cannabis products. There's been a global secular trend towards the rescheduling of cannabis globally. Most recently, you may have seen articles pointing to a Moroccan legalization, which again is just fantastic. It's a mainstream product now. The goal is really for the cannabis industry to start to take the market back from the black market, and we believe that is very much in motion now. There are still obviously some big regulatory hurdles. The US and Canada, but particularly the US with its issues around federal legalization, do make it challenging for us at times to look really heavily outside of Europe. But again, in the future, we think we're going to be able to do that. And certainly with Joe Biden coming into the US and talking about federal legalization has massively helped the industry. And of course, because the world followed the US into prohibition, we believe that the world will follow the US out of prohibition. In terms of the stigma around cannabis, I think it's largely falling away. I mean, there will always to some degree be a bit of a stigma, but ultimately it's a challenger for so many industries, whether that be pharmaceutical, whether that be textiles, whether that be just health and wellness over the counter. There really are so many areas that it'll challenge across those verticals of pharma, medical, over-the-counter wellness, and of course recreational. Right now, we can't go anywhere near the recreational market, so everything we do is supported by heavy legal opinions. This global map here that you can see with the areas of legal status is, you can see how much of the world is really starting to move towards cannabis rescheduling in one form or another. So really think we've got a massive opportunity here. I'm absolutely the most excited I've been in years. All this hard work that we've been putting into gaining the knowledge, becoming real experts in the sector. We're now in a position where we can really start to capitalize on that. And we're so much further ahead of anybody else who wants to come and challenge that. Focusing again, high growth markets, that's what we're interested in. We're not a fund that's sitting here looking to pay a 5 or 6% dividend every year. We're here to try and grow our capital, certainly on a personal level, and I'm sure Lance will give his views on this as well. My first hurdle is of course 50 million in market cap, but really I want us sort of by the end of this year to be really moving towards that triple-digit market cap. At that point, I will sort of start to feel like we are getting to where we really should be. But ultimately, there's a lot of work to do. You have my full commitment on getting us to that place, and it's really just a question of making sure that we take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us. In terms of our investment case, I think we offer a really interesting opportunity for people to get exposure to early stage opportunities. Hopefully, as I said earlier, you're going to be getting opportunities to invest, really get exposure at seed stage, founder stage in the assets that we're going into. And that, of course, will be balanced out by things that are a little bit more mature and potentially already or listing companies. We are still the only AIM-listed company that has any direct exposure to medical cannabis, and ultimately the balance has tipped in favor of cannabis companies now, certainly in terms of number of investments, but I want our NAV to be predominantly based on cannabis exposure. as we go into the sort of second half of this year. Ultimately, are we going to be a pure cannabis fund? I have to be to some degree careful around what I say, but ultimately that is really where I see FastForward moving to over the next period of time. But of course, we don't want to. Our strategy allows us to look at health and wellness outside of cannabis, and we don't want to prejudice ourselves. So it's really important that we give ourselves the flexibility to look at opportunities based on what we think we can deliver back to shareholders. So again, really thank you for listening to me. I think we've got a really strong team. We've got a really good track record internationally, and really there's unparalleled cannabis experience. So I'm going to hand over to Lance now. Although it's not in the deck as such, I think it'd be great if Lance can just give us a bit of a overview of where we're at from the financial position. And again, thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to answering some questions soon.
Thanks for that, Ed. Okay, so that's the exciting bit, guys. Let's talk a little bit about costs. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that we've had some criticism in the past of FastForward's overall cost percentages compared to NAV. Our latest key information document showed 7.6%. And whilst that's not ideal, it is somewhat a function of scale. The building of scale was dealt a bit of a blow when we wrote down Factum. The subsequent costs that we spent trying to protect our investment have exacerbated that a little bit. But I think, as Ed alluded to just now, we believe that now is the time that we can build scale. We're repositioning this fund into the cannabis and cannabinoid wellness space, and it's an exciting time in the market. This is the time that we can do this. Obviously, we can mitigate some of the costing percentage side of things by capitalizing more deal and investment related costs. We're looking at this. We've not been great at doing that in the past, which does affect the return figures. But that's something that we will look at and seek to improve on that key information document and total expense ratio calculation in the future. Certainly, looking at where we're at, we have saved some costs recently. Obviously, Ed replacing Lorne has helped to save about 150,000 in this last year on that side of things. And we're also looking at the costs of various service providers and making some changes to keep those overheads as low as we reasonably can. At this point, we expect those supplier overheads, excluding the deal costs, to be in the region of sort of 350,000 for the 2021-22 financial year, which I think is acceptable given our market cap and size, and certainly less than some with similar market caps out there. I think onto that sort of 350, you can add a similar cost for employment costs and directors' fees, and you've got a total of 600,000 before deal costs, something like that, going forward. Now, as I said, though, this is looking at the 2022 year. The upcoming financial statements will see higher costs for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there were costs associated with the two fundraisers that we've undertaken in the last 6 months. Secondly, there were those costs that we've spoken about in relation to Factum and so on. And finally, and this is something that we just have to address, investing in medicinal cannabis, CBD, and those related companies. These investments come at higher cost in terms of legal opinions, due diligence work that's required to satisfy the regulatory position, our regulators, the AIM markets, nomads, and so on. We've got to be sure, and we've got to be able to convince the market that we're not investing outside of the letter of the law and putting ourselves and you as our investors into a difficult situation. This all said, I do expect to be below the 7.6% last year. I want to target 5% or less for the future years as we scale and build this investment portfolio. As Ed says, heading 50 million and upwards, that will drop. I expect those percentages down further. And I would say again, just remember when you compare Fast Forward to other exchange traded funds, remember that our investment mix is a bit different. We're going to be a little bit more expensive than those that are investing purely in listed stocks out there. Well, that's enough on that. Turning to more exciting points and sort of adding to what Ed has said about our investment portfolio. This isn't a valuation point. It's not a time where we can give you a full NAV and what have you. That will come with the financial statements as at 31st of March, which we expect to be releasing halfway through the year. It would, however, be a good time to point out some of the highlights. And I think let's start with EMAC. EMAC, we invested overall 2.7 million, initially 2, and then another 700,000 in the convertible loan note. And we carried that in September at 2.4 million. The convertible loan came on after that, bringing us up to an implied 3.1 million. Whilst I can't give you an absolute number for that right now, I think we can all agree this is probably a bit on the light side, and we would be expecting to see an uplift, a nice uplift on that. Leap, as Ed said, our biggest investment by both share in the company and share of our net asset value. We haven't had a revaluation on there since March of last year. But over that time, and as we've reported, there's been some continued development on the opportunities that Yariv and his team at Leap have seen, and I think we've publicised a lot of that, talking about the growths in turnover and opportunities, new opportunities they've been seeing. Last valuation, we took this at about 7.1 million. That's what we carried it at in September. And I think even with the weakening FX position of the euro against the pound, we have developed from that, and would expect to see some decent uplifts on there, and hopefully that will be crystallised with a liquidity event in the future. Yuma, moving on to them. Great result, I think, for Yuma since they've listed. They're listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange with the ticker YUM now, and they have really gone from about a 2 million carrying value at September through to a market value now, which was around about Canadian dollars 5 million, so about £3 million over the last couple of days. It's about 15% of our portfolio now, similar to EMAC, and probably only behind Leap in terms of significance for us. Portage, another great success on the markets. Canadian Stock Exchange and Nasdaq, as Ed has mentioned. We've seen this increase from sort of $10 to $15 per share to more than double this, and whilst we've quietly sort of sold about half of the original position, up to twice the cost price actually, the remaining holding is worth significantly more than we started, at about 1.6-1.7 million. On top of these investments, Ed's talked about the new ones that are already on the portfolio, and as you'd expect, he's working hard to bring us a bunch of new opportunities, and I'm personally very thankful for his hard work. Very much look forward to sharing further developments with you all as we bring new investments on, and also in relation to our existing portfolio that we've been talking about today. So thank you, Ed. I think I'll pass back to you.
Thank you very much, Lance. I think now it's a good time to go. I mean, just a few very quick points on what Lance has raised there. I think it's fair to say that in terms of our NAV, we're always trading, with that some way behind us just because of the accounting periods. So, NAV is a nice sort of indicator, but it really doesn't necessarily capture where we are right now. Of course, that can go both ways, but I think with the portfolio that we've got, I can sort of safely say that I think we're worth far more than our previous NAV position. Now, of course, I should also add that nothing that we are saying here today is sort of guidance to buy, sell, hold. That's not our job. We're not allowed to do that. one must do their own research and make their own decisions. But all I can say as a sort of final point before we get into the questions is, we really are at the most exciting time. We've gone from one exciting time to another exciting time with Fast Forward, and I really, really feel super excited about what we're going to be doing over the next sort of 6 months. And again, I think you'll see this cannabis market, as you've seen in North America, you'll see waves of it. It's not going to be one big crescendo. You'll see ups and downs, but ultimately the trend will be to a lot of very, very large companies indeed being built over the next few years. So this is not it's a hot sector now. It's going to be quite cyclical, and you'll see a lot of excitement at various points over the next few years. That's my take on it.
Ed, Lance, thank you very much for the presentation there. Ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation is ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Ed, Lance, we have received a number of pre-submitted questions from investors, and I'd like to start the Q&A session off with these. Perhaps the first one I can address to you, please, Ed, and I can see we've had a few questions on the live meeting come through on this area as well. Please give us an indication of a date for the LEAP IPO. Even if not a date, could we have Q2, Q3, Q4 would be sufficient?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair. I can give some pretty good guidance on that. The team at Leap is working really, really hard. There's a lot of opportunity going on, particularly since that Malta gaming license was sought and approved. That's also opened up a huge amount of business opportunity for them. You've recently seen the EuroLeague transaction, which is massive. I mean, that's only second to the NBA. So again, that's a really big thing. They've got some very interesting things happening in the pipeline as well. And I think I can sort of reasonably say that a sort of Q3 listing for Leap is really quite realistic.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Ed. The next one we've got, again for you, Ed. Why have you not bought any Fast Forward stock? I struggle to believe that the company's been in closed period since your appointment, especially it's been trading in single figures for months.
Look, that is true. We are in closed periods a lot, and it's not just closed periods. The fact that I'm so involved in a number of the portfolio companies means that I'm essentially always pregnant with inside information. Now, there have been the odd opportunity, but being totally frank, and I want to be 100% transparent about this. My own personal liquidity hasn't always been in the perfect situation to buy the level of stock that I would like to be able to purchase. I don't think doing 10,000, 20,000 pounds of investment here and there it doesn't set the right precedent. It's not. I want to have more stock than that when I do get in the right position. I'm in a better position from that perspective currently, but I'm waiting for opportunities, and at the moment, unfortunately, they are very seldom with the amount of things that are going on in our very fast-moving portfolio. But I will buy shares at some point, and I hope it's going to be meaningful.
Thank you, Ed. The next one perhaps I can address to Lance. Please can you explain the reasoning behind not telling shareholders when you dispose of an investment? How are we meant to make an investment decision when we don't know the portfolio we're investing in?
Yeah, sure, and thank you for the question. I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think the cases that you're talking about here are Portage and Cannabo, where we've sold a part of the investments over a period of time, longer period on Portage, shorter on Cannabo. I hear the concern, and rest assured that we do talk about this when we're in these situations, but it's a difficult one when you're looking to sell down listed positions. The fact of the matter is, it's not going to be helpful to us in selling those down, in gaining the best price. If we then halfway through are going out there and publicizing that we're out there on the market and selling, in fact, quite the opposite. That can actually have a detrimental effect to the price. So it's a difficult one. We've got to act in our shareholders' interests, and often that means keeping quiet. But we of course seek to make those changes known as soon as is reasonably practical, whether that's a standalone announcement afterwards or as part of a broader update, as we're having today, or the other RNS updates that we put out there. So thank you for that.
That's great. Thanks, Lance. The next one's actually I think for you as well. Was the LEAP valuation, the last financial accounts, based on an indicative indicative price based on the last fundraise, or a valuation from independent third party?
We got an independent valuation report for the March 2020 financials. So that was the last main valuation that we had on there. That value was carried through to the interims, although we updated for FX rates, obviously. That valuation was in euros, and we report in sterling. Given the significant developments in turnover at LEAP, as I spoke about before, and as we talked about in our RNSs and social media posts, I'd expect a fairly significant uplift to that figure when this valuation is repeated.
Thanks, Lance. And another one actually for you. Will the board consider paying dividends to shareholders after an asset disposal, such as LEAP Gaming? This would also provide the benefit of rewarding long-term shareholders as opposed to traders who would likely sell on news.
Yeah, again, a great question, and thank you for it. I mean, FastForward has stated in our investment policy that our focus is on generating capital returns over the medium to long term. It's certainly something. Dividends are certainly something that we have considered and we will consider when we have larger disposals. But there's a balance to be found, and that balance is between the likelihood of being able to redeploy that capital into new opportunities, which will have new gains. That's what we're doing this for you guys as shareholders, in a reasonable time frame. And that reasonable time frame has to take into account the market conditions at the time of whatever disposal. Obviously, some shareholders more than others would welcome some dividends, and the other part of that is that FastForward doesn't receive dividends itself from our portfolio companies. So, when we're looking at whether we can deploy money out in a timely way, what we're also thinking about is, well, actually, if we have deployed that money and the next opportunities are coming up and we want to be making investments in them, we do not want to be in a situation where we've dividended cash out and therefore have to go out and do a placing or whatever to raise new funds. So it is a balance. It's a balance between deployment and not holding too much cash, yes, rewarding our shareholders, but also in balancing that capital appreciation within the net asset value.
Thanks, Lance. And the final one for you, how much cash is remaining? Will this be focused on buying new assets or increasing investment in existing FastForward assets, or a mixture of both?
Okay, thank you for that. So about 2.5 million sterling equivalent currently. About 85% of that is in sterling, and we've got about twice of that amount actually in liquid investments. Now, those aren't all expected to be realised immediately, but I think when we talk about liquid, we're sort of saying in the next 12 months. So we're in line with our policy, and we've got plenty of dry powder out there. The second part of the question, talking about existing assets or some of both, or all into new, I think you've got to expect that there will be some follow-on investments, but we're not expecting that to be a significant part of it. It perhaps might be 80-20 in favour of new investments is my figure, and I'm hesitant to quote numbers, and that is a top of mind guess, but certainly the focus is on new deployments, particularly in this market where there's so much attractive stuff out there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lance. The final pre-submitted question, back to you, please, Ed. How long will it take FastForward to become a fully established cannabis-focused fund?
I think the writing's on the wall. I mean, we're already moving in that direction. I hope it's fairly clear that we're utilising our considerable expertise in that industry. And of course, it's a whole bunch of different categories when you think about cannabis. So, you know, we have obviously that over-the-counter wellness, we have the medical, we have the pharma. There really aren't any proper pharma players out there at the moment. And I think it's an area, you would have all seen the GW Pharma announcement recently. It's an area we really want to get some real good early stage exposure to. Again, that would be a longer term situation, but you know, I think I've sort of telegraphed it a few times. I really want to see FastForward really pin its hat to being a cannabis dominant fund. And in terms of the timing, well, we're on our way.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That concludes the pre-submitted questions. Ed Lance, we have had a number of questions submitted during the presentation, as you can see, and there is quite a few of them there, so we may not be able to get through all of those in today's session, but of course, just to remind investors, we will review all of the questions that have been submitted. Perhaps if I could just hand back to you to start at the top, and where appropriate to do so, if you could read out the question and even who it's from, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Sure. I'll start if that's okay, Lance. Richard W. asked, can you provide background context to the recent share disposal by JM, I assume he means Jim Mellon, and transfer by Lorne Abbey? Also, how many shares do the board members hold? Okay, I'll start with Jim. Jim obviously has a family office that he employs a number of people to run. They, at times, will take and trim positions. I can't give you the exact reasoning, but of course Jim is also very involved directly with a number of the portfolio assets. But you know, for all intents and purposes, we have a very good relationship with Jim. We talk about investment opportunities very regularly. But you know, equally, Jim is no longer involved in the board. On the board, he typically is very involved with the companies that he is involved with. But you know, if there are ever positions where a large shareholder wants to exit, we're going to be able to find a home for it with hopefully someone equally impressive pretty quickly. In terms of Lorne Abbey, again, you know, there's a balance here between giving anyone's personal information, and it's not my place to do that. But you know, the US tax system is quite different than here in the UK. Obviously, Lorne is an extremely wealthy man, and there's only so much assets you can transfer downwards. So sometimes you have to transfer them upwards as well to take the benefits of that estate planning that you're allowed to do. And it's really, you know, estate planning, tax planning, whatever you want to call it. But again, I don't want to sort of go into too much detail on that, but there's no issue. Lorne still remains a supportive shareholder, and of course he's very involved in a lot of the companies such as Yuma and EMAC directly. In terms of the current number of shares that the board members hold, I can't give you that number, but I will endeavour to get that answered. Going into another question, this is from Tony S. Do you expect the UK and in brackets and EU legislation to relax on recreational use? I assume you mean cannabis again. Would FastForward invest in this space? There's two very different points here. Obviously, I do, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the world will follow the US out of prohibition. I don't think it necessarily happens overnight. It's an evolution, and each territory will deal with things slightly different in the same way that they have with the rescheduling of even medical cannabis. Would FastForward invest in the space? I think at this point in time, we would certainly not be able to. It would just not, our regulators would not allow it. It would be an issue of illegality. Proceeds of Crime Act would be triggered, and it's certainly something we couldn't do. If the UK were to become legalize to reschedule cannabis as a recreational adult use product, and the regulator accepted and moved with that, then you know we would have to obviously consult our shareholders. But I think you know, I find it hard to believe that people wouldn't want us to do that. Let me just have a quick look into the rest of these questions. Lance,
while you have a look at those, Yeah, while you have a look at those, Ed, I think Mark W asked a question about what material events might be most transformational for Fast Forward, and I think that that one is probably a bit of a split answer. I think one of the events that's just happened recently is the FCA's guidance on the ability of UK companies and listed companies to invest in Canada's space, and obviously that's seen the opening of the market, and we've all seen these IPOs that have happened over the last couple of weeks. I think internally, looking at Fast Forward and the steps, we've made a number of steps towards focusing this business on cannabis and cannabinoid wellness and that side of things. And I think probably the most material event that would take us forward internally on that will be when we are able to have a liquidity event with Leap. And that's something that, as Ed said, we're working very hard at this point in time. So can't give you any more detail on that, but I think, Mark, that's probably the answer to that question.
Great. I've got one more question that I'll just deal with quickly. Kevin Andrew H. We are previously told that Leap Gaming would move into profit in Q3 2020. Has this been the case? The answer is no. And the reason is because we actually don't necessarily think that profit is a particularly important thing with regards to Leap at this point in time. Growth is the key factor here. Revenue growth is the key factor, not so much profit. And the reason for that is that the market values gaming companies on a 6 to 7 times 2-year forecast revenues. So certainly for my money, I think the most important thing is to make sure that that revenue is increased as much as possible. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that they should burn cash at a crazy rate in order to do that, but there is a balance, and I think we've got the balance quite right at Leap at the moment.
I think there was a question from Ed E as well about quarterly updates, please. Yeah, absolutely. This is a first for us in terms of doing this type of an update, and yes, we're very committed to doing more and more of this sort of thing, more regular updates. To the extent that we're able to. Obviously, we can't say everything about every company because some of it's commercially sensitive, some of it's inside information and what have you, but we are certainly committed to getting more information flow out to you guys.
Thanks, Lance. Yeah, and again, just as a final word from myself, I really appreciate everyone taking the time. I really appreciate the support our shareholders have shown. And obviously, we want to engage with you as much as is humanly possible. Of course, we also don't want to be people who are just constantly doing presentations just for the sake of it. We want to be able to bring you new information around new investments that we've made and transition of existing investments in the portfolio. So again, really appreciate your support and your time. Thank you very much again to Investor Meet Company. And we look forward to the next one, which I promise you will be far sooner than not.
Thank you. On that note, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Lance, for updating investors today and also addressing a number of those questions. And just to remind the investors on the call, the company will review all the questions submitted there and will publish those answers where appropriate to do so on the platform. Ed, thank you again for just wrapping up there. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you will now automatically be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you've accessed this meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear in front of you. If you've accessed the meeting via the link sent in the email, simply ask to log in. It will just take a couple of seconds and it will be great for your thoughts and expectations to be delivered back directly to the company. On behalf of Fast Forward Innovations Limited, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That concludes the session. Thank you and good morning.